Today's Photowalk is dedicated to the memory of Ian Anderson.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.
I am once again walking in woodland, as the song went from Mark Cohen. That wasn't the song, Neil. Here we are, Photowalk. 'Twas the Photowalk before Christmas, quite literally, although I suspect this might be a Photowalk that will keep a shelf life through Christmas and the New Year period. I always thought that dark humour was a British invention, also known, of course, as gallows humour, that grim and ironic humour in a desperate or hopeless situation. Thank you, Uncle Wiki. Turns out, though, those wicked French satirists, they invented it. Humour noir, it was called. And it's not as old as you think. It was a 1930s expression from the Depression era, where otherwise there wasn't really anything funny to josh about, was there? But then we all had a go, all around the world. And I think us Brits, we went on to refine it to a degree. When you think of Monty Python with crucified criminals singing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life." Sigmund Freud, he even waded in on this. He knew a thing or two about mental distress. He put forward his own theory on humour noir, saying it's a utensil of the ego, which likes to insist that it can't be troubled by any unfortunate turn of events. So I did wince smile at 11 o'clock last weekend, driving home from the wedding I'd so cruelly retitled The Super Spreader, due to its close proximity of crowding everyone into a room that small you could effectively smell everyone's fear. I did wince smile listening to the radio when I heard the suggestion that in many parts of the world, including mine, it feels right now like a bad shopping trip to a famous Swedish furniture superstore. You've just gotten to the part of IKEA where you consider you're on the home run, that close to the end, you know, the plastic £1 plants bit, and you turn the corner of the aisle, blink, open your eyes again, and you've ended back at the start in the living rooms and storage bit, the Groundhog Day of shopping. So here we are then, in this latest season of this box set of COVID, and it's Christmas. The two should not be named in the same sentence. So I thought the end of the year show, since I'm taking a break next week, should bring a little inspiration. Something to take on your seasonal walk, to march off the excesses of wind-inducing turkey or nuclear reactive sprouts. Oh, I do love a sprout or nine, but don't sit next to me during the post-Christmas meal board games. So I've not got just one focus guest today, I've got a myriad. A revisit to the last year of guests and their short 1 to 2 minute inspirational sharings, if there's such a word. So it's your letters and our guests from 2021 in between, kind of like a cleanser de palette of inspiration sprinkled along our path.
Today on the Photowalk.
I absolutely love what I do, and I wouldn't change it for anything at all.
I could have died in Tibet and been very happy to finish my life at that point.
I found that when I took photos, and especially when I had the viewfinder to my eye and was really doing a lot of street photography, that the rest of the world sort of became quiet.
It is so wonderful being a journalist at this point in the 21st century, because we have so many ways to tell stories, right?
The subjects know that they have the same lived experience, or I have the same lived experience as them.
Yeah.
And they know that I will press the shutter and take responsibility with what I try and portray with that image.
Stories of life told by photographers, and they are just some of the medley of voices I hope will inspire you today as we take our final photo walk of the year together. A Christmas edition of sorts, if that's the day you observe, but if not, I think this really is a chance to thank you and do what we do every Friday, which is find some time for each other, take a walk, me with the letters, both of us with our cameras, making some pictures along the way. A tinsel-covered thank you to all the good people at mpb.com who've been our sponsor in 2021. And if you're in the UK, the US or Europe, and you find yourself a few guineas richer this holiday season, you may want to visit MPB and look at the quality used kit they have. So if the figure in the big red coat brought you something that didn't click and make pictures in the way you rather hoped it might, then this could be the place to spend time in over the coming weeks. Remember, you can buy, trade and sell the kit you need, and in doing so, be a part of the sustainable circular economy. Buy used, spend less and get more. Go to mpb.com and buy, sell, trade, create. A nod to our patrons too, of course, and later on I have a personal thank you to make. So no one single guest today, no focus guest, more a chance to play back some 1 to 2 minute clips from those that I've spoken with. Though it was, as you can imagine, an impossible task to fit everybody in. So I'll do my best with a bit of a musical sequence featuring as many as I can later on. So what are we talking about today? Well, there's a trip down my memory lane with a certain Mr. Dawson. The best gift. Why most creative people seemingly give up. Or do they? The labels we give ourselves and our skills. Pictures you've been making. Kippers. Yes, the fishy things. Kippers. Recording sound, a word about trolls, and a heartfelt thank you, and why I think photography is the best gift we could give to ourselves. Shall we walk then? Coffee and Garibaldi's packed. Check. Boots on and definitely laced. Check. Warm walking pants. I'm just going to call them pants if you don't mind from now on. Check. Spare batteries. Check. Film or cards. Check. Earbuds in. Check. Lens caps off. Let's walk. I'm in a place called Bowdown Woods today. I've been here before, but I've not really ventured far into, well, not a long way into the woods, and today I am. I could be out by New Year. If not, send a rescue team. Right, bear with me, because this does go somewhere. There is a comedian, or was, called Les Dawson. Apologies for those who don't live in the UK, but to paint a picture, he was the kind of classic 70s and 80s comic who told some jokes that were perhaps of their time, but not the sort that have subsequently banned him from telly altogether. He was a household name with his very deadpan style, curmudgeonly persona, and jokes about his mother-in-law. That was his act, really. His mother-in-law. I spent a very pleasant evening actually on the island of Lanzarote. Hang on, Clang, name, with his wife and a couple of actors. Another story for another day. But probably the funniest evening meal I've ever had. I peaked early, age 21, definitely, and I think it's the first ever interview I recorded with a real star. I must dig it out. It is somewhere. Christmas season on telly was invariably peppered with Les Dawson shows. I can imagine his mother-in-law hiding behind the sofa at home, not for the Doctor Who Christmas Day special, but to hide from the words from her son-in-law.
I've just had some bad news. Tomorrow it's the mother-in-law's funeral, and she's cancelled it. Actually, despite the things I say about that woman, I'm very fond of her. When she was ill last year, I said to the wife, I said, don't worry about your mother. If she's at death's door, I'll pull her through.
Some shared ephemera there. There was a joke that he managed to make tame, involving the mother-in-law at Christmas, some mistletoe, a great deal of shock, and a belt buckle. I shall not be attempting it, but it all kind of plays into the first Christmas and New Year themed letter on our end-of-year special from Mark Kingwell. Hi Neil, 'tis the season for comedy specials, films that you've seen 100 times, and stark reminders that another year has gone around and you still haven't lost the pounds you said you would. I know though that I'm one of the lucky ones when I watch the news, and I can live with yet another rerun of Morecambe and Wise, the 101st showing of Finding Nemo, and a weighing machine that seems to be stuck on the wrong number. So I've counted my blessings and sat down to dust off my Nikon FE that I went hunting for in the loft after all these mentions of how film has re-energised photographers' love for the hobby, in my case during 2021. My wife Jenny asked, quick mention for her, though I know it's not a request show, in brackets. Well, it can be. Jenny, hello, how are you? Good. My wife asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I simply said film, and lots of it. Only black and white and a free pass to my wonderful but excessively loud 12-year-old twins for a couple of hours each Saturday morning to walk about and, as you say, make photographs. My project for 2022 then now has a title. It is called 52. Each week, I shall shoot a roll of film, develop it myself, and take one picture that I particularly like to make and publish a book with a run of probably only 2, called, can you guess, 52. I promised to take you along on the walk, of course, though my preferred biscuit of choice with a coffee break, I'm afraid, is milk chocolate hobnobs. I fear the losing pounds thing could be at risk. All the best from a 40-something-year-old photographer finding film instead of Nemo. Oh, very well written. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for all your mails. You know I now call them letters. I've gone very analogue with it over the last year. I've thoroughly appreciated them. Right, some inspiration then. 2 guests in particular talking about their photography as a kind of, I suppose as a kind of oxygen, really. We've featured Edmund Terakopian a few times this year as a main guest, talking about exhibitions and, of course, photojournalism during these times. So we're going to hear from him in a moment about always being ready with your camera. But first Tim Johnston, who really, I think, said some important things earlier in the year about the power of this thing we love, and that power that it has to quieten our minds. So in some respects, these 2 pieces could be said to be telling a story from 2 totally different ends of the photographic experience. But I think they kind of say the same thing when it comes to sheer fascination of looking and experiencing and drinking, as I like to call it now, as I've borrowed that expression, drinking in life through a camera's viewfinder. I
got my first sort of proper, in quote marks, camera in June 2018. And basically, just getting into photography, I found that when I took photos, and, you know, especially when I had the viewfinder to my eye and was really doing a lot of street photography, that the rest of the world sort of became quiet and I could really just focus on the moment. And part of the problem with my anxiety, at least, is this inability to control my mind and to just really focus on the present moment, because your mind is always wandering off and sort of imagining worst case scenarios. Whereas with photography, that really forced me to be able to just focus on that moment and really just be deliberate in what I was doing. And that was really liberating. And especially when you can then look back and not just experience that moment, but have, you know, a photo that you're proud of at the end of it, is really a rewarding process. And it just became kind of an addiction from that point.
As photojournalists, we tend to never switch off. You're always looking, you're always wondering, you're always thinking. Everything massive from a huge world event happens to something small locally just down the street as you're walking to get some milk or something. You know, these things are always making you think and making you think about the echoes and the layers and the levels and what effect this is going to have on something else and how the world balances, or, you know, everything literally from a huge, big international thing to a smallest kind of local kind of issue. So whilst I absolutely love what I do and I wouldn't change it for anything at all, it is kind of hard work, but not in a kind of standing in a factory working kind of work, but you're mentally, you never really unwind, you don't really relax, because you're always thinking, you're always looking, you're always exploring and so on.
My thanks to Edmund Terakopian, and prior to that we heard from Tim Johnston. Here is a letter from a first-time writer. It's Jeremy Hasler. Hello, Jeremy. Greetings, Neil, he says. I'm making this an early New Year's resolution. I've been saying for a long time, must write to Neil. So here is my long overdue mail, but mainly because I saw something you may wish to share on that famous show page you reference each week. Jordan Peterson. He's a very divisive character for many, but Jordan Peterson, the psychology professor from Canada Land. He's been featured on a new YouTube film called Why Most Creative People Give Up. Right, before I continue with your... Just going to try and negotiate stepping across this brook. There we go. Otherwise, you'd have heard a very different sound in the background. Jordan Peter Splash. So yes, Jordan Peterson. Yeah, there is a name that for many people is quite divisive. I mean, he is a straight talker. Of that, there is no doubt. It makes for fascinating viewing and listening because far from it being something that's simply a negative message to anyone, Jeremy says, who intends to make a living from art, or in our case, photography, with my hobby in watercolour painting, it's a really well-crafted monologue that I found truly inspirational. So much so that I wanted to share it with you and those who, like me, listen each week now to your Photowalk. I don't want to give too much away, but I've transcribed a few of the thoughts he has, starting with, the thing about artists, and it's a hard thing to balance properly in our culture, is that artists are unbelievably productive, but it's very hard for them to monetize that productivity. So even though what they produce can be of incalculable value, it's very difficult for them to get any of the economic value from what they've produced. That, for me, writes Jeremy, says everything about what I do for a living, which has often had me think and ponder about my own life choices when it came to the stuff like security and holiday and sickness pay and pensions and, the grown-up things our friends seem to have that we don't. And although it doesn't really serve up any answers, this piece, it does make me realise that I'm in a very well-populated club, and one that's existed since our predecessors first marked pictures on the walls of caves. Blimey, Jeremy, I think you've been reading my diary. These are the kind of things I say. At the end of the film, Jordan says, one thing I would say is buy a damn piece of art. Find one that really speaks to you. It opens your eyes because it's a window into the transcendent. Oh. Now, I'm not trying to claim that my skills are above the range of normal physical human experience. I am an unashamed portrait photographer, if you will forgive the self-deprecation, but it does remind me that we have a special ability as creative people. When I'm not taking portrait pictures, the hillside is my friend, with wild flowers and my bag of watercolours, and I'd not give up either for all the zeros and a company pension scheme. Anyway, he says, watch the film and enjoy all 8 minutes of a very thought-provoking film. It's my cheap Christmas gift to you. I accept all Christmas gifts, cheaper the better. All the best, and thank you for the podcast, which accompany me on my walks to make pictures with camera and brushes. Jeremy. Right, thank you, Jeremy. And I have watched the film. You are right. It is a very inspirational one. If there's one reason to visit the show page this week above all others, well, no, that's wrong. No, take that back. Rewind. If there's a good reason to visit the show page with all the others, then that film is certainly one. There's a link, of course, in your podcast player app to take you to the show page today. Right, some inspiration. Over this challenging period, I've talked with a number of photographers who've made a difference for others with their photographic knowledge, as opposed to making their own projects. They've worked to celebrate or highlight the work of others. And one such photographer, in the very first lockdown, actually, this sort of continued its way through, was Carolyn Mendelssohn, who wanted to highlight how COVID has affected younger people. So she went about mentoring complete novices in photography. They may have had a smartphone, but nothing else. But she went on to mentor them, train them, teach them, listen to them, and watch how they told their story with pictures.
I realised how much their lives had been flipped upside down, and how for some young people that's really devastating, and their exams were cancelled and social lives, their routines and structures had gone. And I was just thinking how shocking that was really for them. And I couldn't see their voice, so I couldn't see the voice of young people or the narrative of their experience anywhere. I remember thinking, if I can, I would be really interested to work with teenagers to see whether I can work with them to enable them to show their story, to tell their story through photography. Bradford Council at that time had decided to allocate a pot of funding that was going to be for summer activities for artists for responses to COVID-19 response grant.
No, it's incredible.
Isn't that amazing? So amazing. And I thought, though in a lot of ways I wasn't feeling very much like doing anything. I was in a bit of shock in those first couple of weeks. I thought, if I want to do something, I don't want to be doing my own work. I want to actually work with young people. And then I had to think of how would I choose to do this? I thought, okay, I could do it through a video platform. And then the other flip side of me was going, no, because I hated Skype. I hated anything to do with video platforms, talks, anything like that. But I decided I would embrace it. And I'd my aim was to run workshops to mentor young people to tell their story through photography. And it was really important to me that they didn't ever need to have had any photographic experience. They didn't need a camera. They needed some kind of mobile device to take photos, but that was it. And it was important to me that they didn't ever try to please me. Anyway, I was lucky and I got this small pot of funding and I got the word out on social media, every social media platform I could, that I was looking for young people who may be interested in working with me in this way.
Yeah.
And so very soon I got about 20 young people from 12 to 18. And I ran one Zoom session a week. And I also set up an Instagram page and I mentored them individually as well. And in the Zoom session, I would run, skills workshops, how to use your camera, things about composition, light, all the things that make a great picture. But that was one side of it. And the other was that I was always telling them that their experience is unique and important, and the dullest thing in their life, I would find interesting.
The voice of Carolyn Mendelsohn, who'll be on again in the new year, very soon, I hope. Right, the Photowalk. I'm in Bowdown Woods today, which is, I've stayed local to myself at the moment. We're not in lockdown as such as yet, as I say these words. Heaven knows, it changes so quickly. But I decided to sort of do my bit to an extent and stay a bit more local. Right, let me see if I can get a photograph to show you. It's quite, I think these woods are far denser than the ones that I photographed in Sherwood Forest a couple of weeks back. This is a intriguing path. Let's get a photograph here. I rather hoped for mist today because we've had some beautiful misty mornings. And I keep saying to you, don't I must get some misty pictures one day, one of these walks in the mist. But it's just a bit blur as far as the sky goes. But here we go. Shutter speed 100th, ISO 320, f4.5. This is where I am today. Sketchbook image. And actually, just a moment ago as well, I got a picture. Somebody, when you find sort of random items of clothing on walks, for some reason it's always a left shoe, isn't it? Well, invariably, a left shoe. I never know what happens to the people that just leave the left shoe behind. What do? Just carry on with the right shoe for a while. But this was a hat, a woolen hat. Somebody had left a perfectly nice Christmas woolen hat. I felt very inclined to take it. It looked very nice, but I thought, no, somebody will come back for it. So I've got a picture anyway. You can see it on the show page. A something and nothing picture today. Labels have certainly been a sub-theme at times this year, and I mentioned being at odds with a label, wedding photographer. I had 2 letters immediately that I want to share with you with regard labels. Yes, it was a slightly personal exercise on my part, but I think labels are something that many people struggle with. First up, Marianne Crane. Neil, labels. It almost feels like a telling off this. Who cares about labels? We are photographers. It's a bit like amateur versus stroke or professional. Is one better than the other? Certainly not. So don't worry about labels. Concern yourself only with making pictures. As you said yourself, it's not what the picture is about. It's about how the picture makes you feel. Good heavens. Marianne, did Did I really say that? Quick, trademark it. I'm using that on the website redesign. And to add to that, a mail from Eric Jacobi Peterson. Hello, Neil. Labels. Well, you asked how we feel about them. We often put labels on others in order to understand them, but prefer not to have any put on us. When you try to sell something, it's got a label. It caters to a market or a market segment. And that's the problem. Photographers that need to sell their services need mostly to put some kind of label on their services so that the market that's buying can understand them. But is that a label of the photographer, or is that a label of the services offered? Even the word photographer is a label. Now, you mentioned the label of a wedding photographer. That many in the business look down upon this as a profession. From my perspective, says Eric with a K, you have possibly one of the hardest and most diverse photography jobs around. As a wedding photographer, you need to photograph events and parties, portraits of the bride and the groom and the family and the group shots and the landscape photography, all sorts of other details. A wedding photographer is the most cross-disciplined photographer I know. Besides, you need to do it under time constraint, and then we've not even started talking about the people skills required. All those reasons are why I have said no to wedding photography, even when a good friend offered me to tag along and learn from him. All the best from Eric. So thank you, Eric, with a K. There, I think, is one. There's a couple of letters really for all the wedding photographers, and I know we have a fair few that listen. So, inspiration. Let's go back only a few episodes to my guest Susan Goldberg, who is the editor-in-chief at National Geo. What a joy to speak with Susan, who's held many labels, journalist through to now editor-in-chief. And I wondered, after 4 decades working in news, whether anything really still surprises her.
Oh, I get surprised every single day. That's one of the great things about being the editor of National Geographic, is getting to look at the work, and tons of the work, all of the work, of these amazing photographers that we are so privileged to work with around the world, and all different kinds of pictures. And suddenly you find yourself interested in subjects that you never thought you'd be in. I mean, I am not a scientist. I've never been a science writer, but some of our sciencey photographers get me really interested in learning more about these topics.
Do you miss being out there telling the stories?
Occasionally I do, but I think there's so much gratification of working with our great writers and our great photographers and with the editors to tell the stories. And it is so wonderful being a journalist at this point in the 21st century, because we have so many ways to tell stories, right? So many platforms that allow us to reach a larger and more diverse audience than we ever could just in print. And I think that's a real privilege of being a journalist right now.
Susan Goldberg. And from one Sue to another, it's time to see where you've been making pictures on your photo walks. And we'll start with Sue Sayer. And these pictures will be on the show page today, of course. Hello, Neil. I thought you might be interested to see a few images from Storm Barra a couple of weeks back in the UK. I know a little place to walk where it's sheltered, but the view provides the best place for the big waves to be seen with little or no harm done to me or my precious camera kit. Yes, that's very important. We've had stories this year, haven't we, of cameras that have gone swimming. If you take into account that Weston is on an estuary, where when conditions are just right, we sometimes get spectacular waves, which I find hard to ignore. Luckily this time I took my tripod with me, so I thought I'd try a few shots with a slower shutter speed. The sequence you see is alternate shots from a set of 12 of just one wave. I was there for almost 3 hours. It was fantastic, I bet. What a great way to spend time. 3 hours thinking, it's okay, there's no hurry. At some stage, I'll get a really great picture of these waves. And the sequence that you see on the show page today, fantastic. I took far too many photos, says Sue, but as it's difficult to predict just how big a wave is going to be, as well as just how big a splash it's going to make, I had to adopt the just in case it's a whopper, keep clicking attitude. I think that's a new official term. It felt like a long walk back when I decided to call it a day, but it was worth every single moment. I bet it was. Love the podcast. Always so fascinating listening to the stories and the interviews. Kind regards, Sue Sayer from Western on the Mud, as she humorously entitles it. Western Supermare to the rest of us. And here's Colin Mayer in Australia land, who used to be a Blighty dweller. Christmas Day it'll be. If you're listening to this on the day of release, it'll be Christmas Day for you, won't it? Hello, Neil. Kippers. That's what I keep thinking about every time I hear you talk about the photo retreat, the Isle of Wight in February. Strange the memories you have from your childhood. I must have gone to the Isle of Wight when I was about 7 or 8 to a boarding house in Ventnor. A boarding house? That doesn't sound very holiday-like. I still enjoy looking through the collection of 36 slides from each holiday and seeing memories of Black Gang Chine, the Needles, the multicoloured sand from Allen Bay. Look, I'm just working this out. The multicoloured sand. You mean the multicoloured sand on the cliffside, don't you? Not the shop that lets you mix the multicoloured sand, which has become this sort of thing that we do every time we go there. Should we go and put multicoloured sand into some sort of glass receptacle? Glass jar. That's better. Carisbrooke Castle and Roman tiles. For the life of me, I can't remember where the Roman tiles came from. But why do I remember Kippers? The boarding house, which still doesn't sound to me like a fun place to spend a holiday. A boarding house, like boarding kennels, isn't it? Not that boarding kennels are a bad thing, but it doesn't necessarily ring of, we're going on holiday. Shall we go to the boarding house? The boarding house we stayed at had a lovely couple running it, and for breakfast, he had a choice. Cornflakes, prunes, full cooked English breakfast, which is the same as a Scottish breakfast as far as I can tell, unless somebody can explain the difference, or kippers. Do you remember a time, kippers is sort of very, it is of its time, isn't it? Do you remember a time, Colin, when orange juice used to be an item on a menu? Orange juice? No, orange juice? How decadent. Serve me up too, please. And a round of toast as well. A round of toast used to be on a menu. These days you kind of expect it to be there, but then, would you like a round of toast, sir? Oh, yes, please. I'd never tried kippers before, says Colin. I hardly knew what they were, but having rejected the alternatives, picked kippers every day for a fortnight and thoroughly enjoyed them. I don't believe I've had them since. I suspect my dad would have taken a picture of me enjoying my kippers, if only he took 2 rolls of film on holidays. Talking of trying new things, in this week's Photowalk episode, he says, you asked what new things we've tried photographing this year that we hadn't tried previously. During the Big C lockdown, I enjoyed escaping for walks with earbuds in my ears, lens cap off, and exploring new places. I'm really fortunate to live near the Royal National Park, and I walked many of the previously unwalked woodland trails when we weren't allowed to socialise or meet other people for fear of spreading. I'd never have taken the camera with me or considered photo walking until listening to the show. I usually head to a location, set up my tripod, and wait for some nice light to come along. I'm glad I started woodland photo walking as I saw some beautiful flora and captured some happy, peaceful memories in my camera. Really pleasant mindfulness moments. Glad I found the podcast because I wouldn't have started doing this without your encouragement. Thank you from Colin Mayer. Well, thank you, Colin. I'm glad that you found the serenity of the woodland walking. I certainly have this year. I'm going to leave a link to your... there'll be some pictures on the show page today from you. There's a triptych there, but also a link to your work so that you can go and see more of Colin's work online. So some inspiration. I'd like to take you back to episode 232, where Marissa Roth shared her story about photographing in Tibet. And she painted it in such a way that I think it's joined as a location or destination my unofficial bucket list of places to photograph someday.
I tell people, I know they find it shocking, but I tell people I could have died in Tibet and been very happy to finish my life at that point.
Wow.
And I can't explain it. it was so powerful, but I felt like it was all very familiar. Yeah. And I don't know. I felt It was like the happiest I've ever been. It was the most content I've ever been. I felt like I was home in a way. I mean, I had an amazing experience at one of the nunneries in Lhasa. I'd been there on the first trip, but I wanted to go back a second trip because I went with a woman friend and I wanted her to experience it. And it was a much less sort of planned out trip. The first trip, we were just like going over land in constant motion. And the second trip, I said, I just want to base ourselves in Lhasa and kind of just go at the pace that feels comfortable, do what we want to do. So we went to the nunnery. And then at one point we sat with the nuns who were rolling prayers to be inserted into little handheld prayer wheels. And then we went back a second time in the afternoon when they were in prayer. So their prayer sanctuary is fairly small. And I was sitting sort of on a back bench, and one of the nuns beckoned me to sit next to her on the bench, the prayer bench, in between two nuns. And I thought, oh my God, this is a really auspicious, experience. I mean, I was really honored. And I sat down on the seat, and it was like, I thought, oh, this is my seat. It was that kind of almost metaphysical experience. I mean, it was like, okay.
I'm really looking forward today to meeting my good friend Giles on the Photowalk. I'm on my Todd at the moment, but we've agreed to meet up for extreme tea. It's not really extreme tea. It's not like we're at the top of a mountain. And whatever sugary thing that he brings along. I'm hoping it's Garibaldi's. One of his fabulous projects, actually, has inspired a shed that he has in his back garden, which they call the cow shed, with all these fantastic pictures. He's made of cattle grazing on Greenham Common, which is not actually so far up the road from where I am now. Fantastic black and white pieces. Here's one from Barnabas Hammerlick. Hello again, Neil. Well, hello again, Barnabas. Your show, your thoughts, your interviews with the guests keep inspiring me on my photographic journey, of which I'm very thankful to you for. Well, I'm very thankful that you're listening, Barnabas. It wouldn't be the same without you. Pretty much any walk now has turned into a photo walk for me, meaning I have my camera with me all the time, sometimes returning with a single shot, sometimes none at all. But it's with me, just in case. It's the best way to do it. I've yet numerous past episodes to listen to, and lots of notions, ideas, thoughts to clarify about photography gear, style, genre, finding out what suits me and what doesn't, what I want to achieve, what my ultimate goal is, hoping I'm evolving and developing into a better hobby photographer. I realise how little I know by the simple fact that I have so many questions in my head listening to each episode. Barnabas, I'll let you into a secret. I often have the same questions. It's great being, just being inquisitive, isn't it? And I'm always aware that I'm very lucky that I'm able to be inquisitive with some of the world's best photographers, some of the world's biggest brains in this thing that we love. However, says Barnabas, most importantly, I feel that the show keeps the fire burning in me, and it's something that I find rather difficult nowadays, be it photography or any other activity, as it requires time and energy invested in it. So thank you again. Thank you, he says, with my best regards from Slovakia land, Barnabas. Oh, P.S. he says, I'm recording audio again. Photo audio project restarted. Yes, this now I remember the episode. Wasn't I standing outside a fantastic windmill as I read your story? I'm pretty sure I was. We were talking about audio with your photographic still images and using the two as an experience together. And Barnabas had been doing that. He says, you mentioned a video of yours with stills and an audio track. Great idea. Perhaps you don't mind if I borrow the idea? ? Of course I don't. More the merrier, please. And send me what you've been doing so that we can share it on the show page, please. But with that in mind, let's step back to episode 221 and talk again to to Robert Gumpert. Now, I know we had Robert Gumpert on the show last week. He was talking about these projects that he's been making in San Francisco, the Home Project and Division Street. So, so yes, you heard Robert last week talking about an entirely different project. But in episode 221, Robert talked about this just incredible project that he made in county jails. Take a picture, tell a story. That was the project, which had audio with it. His portraits he would make, and then he'd take some time to listen to those behind bars as well and hear their stories. And I just thought it was an incredibly potent idea.
One day I got a call from the aforementioned chief of staff, and she said, "We're closing the state's oldest county jail." It was 72 years old. It was an interesting place, to say the least. "And do you want to document the last 3 months?" And I laughed at her because they had said they'd been closing it for 5 years.
Yeah.
And she said, no, we have a date. It's happening. We're doing it. Do you want to do it? And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And for the last 3 months, I did Friday, Saturday, Sunday shifts on the swing shift. So 3 days a week, 8 hours a day. And I would go in and give them my driver's license, and they would give me a set of keys.
They give you a set of keys, right? Okay.
And I finished.
Yeah.
And there was an exhibit. And I went to the sheriff and I said, "We're done. I'm done." And he said, "Great." And I said, "But I have this other project I would like to do." And he said, "What is it this time?" And I said, "I'd like to do it. People like to talk to me. I'd like to do a project called Take a Picture, Tell a Story. It's open to everybody in the jail, meaning everybody, the deputies, operating staff, everybody who wants to do it. And they will sit and talk. They'll get a copy of the story they tell, and they'll get a copy of prints." And he says, "Well, that sounds very interesting. How often and where do you want to do it?" And I said, "I want to do it for as long as I want, anywhere I want." And he looked at me and said, "I need to think about it." I said, "I'll call you tomorrow, if that's how long it takes." He said, "Oh, that's fine." I called him and he said, "Fine." So I thought it would last a year. Then it lasted 2 years. Then it lasted 3 years. And after 3 years, the whole thing kind of changed. Originally, it was going to be some sort of document. I don't know what, but an exhibit, but it was for, we take pictures or we tell stories of the people in front of us, and then we turn around and we give it to people behind us, the consumer of it. And that was the idea. And after 3 years, it became pretty apparent to me that that was not the idea anymore. The idea was this was an exchange between the subject and myself. And it was quickly becoming just the prisoners, primarily because nobody else would take part.
Robert Gumpert, and I'll link to that episode. And you must go and see Robert's extraordinary work, not only what we were talking about last week, but also the, as I say, the incredible potent audio with still images that he made in those county jails. Well, we're nearing the end of another year of the podcast, being out together, making our pictures as we walk, stopping for a while to take in a coffee and just the views that are in front of us. And I'm taking a week's break next week, returning Friday the 7th. Though patrons, there are a few thoughts for you on our Patreon channel on both Christmas and New Year's Day. And my thanks again to our patrons. You are so special to this show, continuing and growing. The growth is really important. All sorts of plans. I'll come to that in a while. But let me introduce you to this week's Patron of the Week, and I'll link to his work on the website. It's Daniel O'Shea. Hello, Neil. My name is Daniel, and I live in the beautiful Ballyhoura region, in a village called Kilfinane in County Limerick in Ireland. Essentially an ideal area for photo walks. I'm a brewer by trade, but I have an interest in photography now close on to a decade. I was inspired to pick up a camera when my now wife and I went to live in Perth while searching for work during the recession. Happily, we're home now and very much settled with 2 kids under 2, or as settled as you can be in the whirlwind of joy that they bring. What is it? That sounds like twins. What is it with twins this week on the show? I'm always happy Friday morning on my commute, as I know that that you're there to pass the drive in. The themes which you touch are absolutely right up my alley at the moment. Since becoming a dad, the idea of finite time, memories, and who or what my photography hobby is for really does play on my mind. They are something I think about daily, and I've had so many light bulb moments from listening to the show. I very much consider brewing to be a creative role. Well, I do as well. It's a very skilled job, isn't it? Similar, he says, creativity to photography. I conceptualize, I design, I brew, I release a beer to be put forward for public scrutiny. As such, I suffer frequent episodes of imposter syndrome and doubt in my career, along with the odd troll here and there. So I love listening to you talking about these things in relation to photography too. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you tend to think that trolling is something that happens in the creative environment or the political environment, or I suppose I could come up with a long list here, but I wouldn't have immediately said, oh, that must be something that touches you in brewing. But there we go, it does. But Dan, what was it Sean Tucker said? You'll never find a talented troll. Just remember that. You know me, I rather wax lyrical about Sean. I mean, he's been very generous over the last year coming onto the show. And there's a very calm nature to Sean, isn't there? A calm nature whenever you speak with him, but equally with his YouTube channel, which is why if I had a top 5 of channels, photography channels, Sean would most certainly be one of those. He's stepped in a few times this year to talk with us, and you, of course, on the show. But first of all, thank you, Dan, for your mail. I will link to you today on the show page. Thank you very much for being a patron as well. And shall we play a few moments from Sean Tucker? I think it seems pertinent, doesn't it? As I say, he's stepped up a few times to talk on the show, and in particular, as we emerged from our lockdowns all across the world, some going back in, of course, the nature of the uncertainty had really affected a friend of mine to such a degree earlier on this year that he was suffering watching everyone else seemingly okay, but not feeling so good himself. So, I mean, he had a bad case, and we've all suffered this to a degree from time to time. That sort of, why is everyone on social media looking like they're doing so much better than me? What is wrong with how I'm doing this or tackling this? Why is everybody else okay? This is then Sean Tucker as we discuss the phenomenon of how is everyone else okay but me?
I think you have to be aware of the marketing. Like, everyone's always marketing, so especially online. So you're not hearing from people who are struggling because they don't want to admit it. The fact that your friend reached out to you to say, hey, I'm struggling, is unfortunately too rare, and no one ever, or very rarely, jumps on social media to tell the general public that they're struggling. All you'll ever hear are people who are doing okay and getting by and bragging about it. So don't ever jump online to try and get a good gauge of how everyone's doing, because you'll only hear from the voices who are shouting about how well they're doing. The vast majority of, you can take it for granted, the vast majority of people at the moment are really struggling and are really worried about how they're going to keep things working out. That is the fact. And I think the sooner you realize that, I'm sure speaking to friends helps. And doing that, what he's done with you is good, because if you reach out to some friends vulnerably to say, hey, I'm struggling at the moment, chances are at the moment they're going to say, yeah, I'm really struggling back, and you're going to feel less alone. So the more of us can do that with each other, I think the more chance we've got of making it through this together and not having to suffer through it alone. But again, it doesn't make the problem any better. I'm aware of that, but it does put it in perspective, and I think that's important.
Sean Tucker, I've chosen a big hill to walk up right at the end of this year's Photowalk. It's going to be an out-of-breath end to the year. But in terms of Sean, as far as inspirational voices go, I want to play out shortly with a medley of some more voices. So not that you were going anywhere, but hang about for that. The idea of having the extra voices on the show sort of, it organically developed earlier on this year, and I think it's been a very welcome part of each photo walk. So that's coming up shortly, and that is it for this year. I want to thank all those that have written into the show with your pictures, your thoughts, and your memoirs, because the latter, memories or memoirs, are actually a really, really important part of this show, and I want to do more of that in 2022. Your memories of shoots, things that you've seen, things that you've done, they're a powerhouse of help for others to listen to. So they don't have to have any context or theme. And I'd love to hear from you. I haven't given the email address this week, so studio@photographydaily.show is the email address. And if you have some time, and you can do it, of course, through the website as well, there's a contact page there. If you have some time over the Christmas period, just jot me something that you've done in photography or somebody perhaps that you've met who's imparted some really great words or advice that we can share on this Photo Walk show. I'm very aware that you may well have a mail or a letter, as I like to call them, lingering in the inbox at PDHQ. And if you have, rest assured, I will get to it on the show. You know me, I do some things out of sequential order from time to time. What, Neil? That's an understatement. I know. And it's almost like I like to think it's like your letter is waiting for the right connection to a guest, or perhaps a theme that, that's the way that I look at it. And I suppose there's a unique nature to waiting. Should we call it the maturing room? Do they have one of those in brewing? We were talking about brewing a moment ago. So you are special, not forgotten. Know that. So thank you to those that have sent in their mails. It is a one-man show, and I do feel like I write a small book each week, what with this and the More Diary show on the Patreon channel. My own hopes and desires for 2022 are that I can reach more people with the messages of inspiration, hope, and super creative ideas that you have and that you so kindly and generously share. So please keep doing it, and if you haven't written before, it is a particular joy to hear from you. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of the show that has grown into a unique kind of programme, a walk together with our cameras and collective thoughts. I'm still working on it, and I have the second poll online to come with regard to the kind of guests that you would like to hear from. The old chestnut length question, where you listen and on what days, that kind of thing, just to keep myself in check, since there's no producer aside. The voice that you've noticed occasionally pops up to argue with myself. A thank you to mpb.com for supporting the show so generously for the last year. And I did do a special last week, which had some good feedback on. So thank you very much for that. It was nice to look around their warehouse and feel, and I mean this, genuinely feel a part of their team. Thank you to our patrons who support the show, and of course to artslist.io, who really helped me to add the dimension of a soundtrack to your stories and those that we talk with. Also, a thank you to those who assist the show, such as Neil Ford at Mission Control in terms of admin for the Facebook group, and the endless list of daft IT questions that I throw at him. Thank you for your patience, Neil. To Emily Renier, who recently joined us as an admin for Facebook as well. And then I can think of at least 10, perhaps a dozen other people who have really helped establish ideas or fed back to my crazy ideas. And or sometimes just being a good set of ears, which is so important. You know who you are, and I will be thanking you personally over the coming weeks. So 2021, I'd like to say it's been fun, and in places, particularly with the photo walk, yes, it has been. I've really thoroughly enjoyed your company, and I'm looking forward to that again in 2022. There's a but coming, Neil. Yes, you can hear it, can't you? There is a but. But if at all possible, Could we avoid needing to learn more letters from the Greek alphabet in 2022? That will be my request. Oh, and lest I forget, another request, keep sending in your photographs from your photo walks. They are so important. Otherwise, there is no Photowalk show. It's just you and me in a studio, drinking coffee and eating Garibaldis. I can think of worse ways to spend time, but I do rather enjoy the Photowalk. So I want to play out with Old Lang Syne. I know, it seems the obvious one, but there is good reason for it. I found a beautiful and haunting, in a good way, adaptation of it by Narrow Skies, which I listened to as I was recording last week's Photowalk and wondering how to end the year musically. I literally, and I mean this, sat with this song and a flask, and I looked along the path that I was treading because it stopped me in my tracks. Well, you'll hear it in a second. And as you do hear it, I want you to think this, that wherever you are in the world, whatever skill level that you have, I have something very special to celebrate. Our creativity and our wonder and our intrigue and our interest and our humanity. And that's something, that really is something unique and a blessing to each and every one of us. Isn't that right, Tiny Tim? But before we figuratively link hands then, some words, a real mixture from many of our guests from the past year on the show.
Every portrait session I've done, I feel like I've gained something from the subject or the model.
This whole thing, like, what people say, you should, the shoulders. Screw the shoulders. Actually, if they come up with a rule that you should do it, great, let's break it tomorrow.
In the process of making the project with my parents, my mother, for example, and my father, they've unearthed photos that they hadn't looked at for years. It's been lovely, actually. It's been really lovely. And it's given me an opportunity to have conversations that I don't think we'd otherwise have had.
I'm coming up as a kid in the 80s, those great images of Bob Marley. They stood the time for 25 years or whatever the case is. You'd see that poster.
I have a strong and firm belief that through photojournalism, we're capturing the truth of what happens on the ground. And some people do not want the truth to be seen or to be told.
I basically sprinkled video and still cameras everywhere because I was, I'm also travel a lot. And I was like, I just said to my kids who were at that point 11 and 8, to Debbie and of course to Julie, if you see something, grab a camera.
It's almost like I was walking down a really dark street and I turned a corner and was just hit by all this beautiful, saturated late afternoon light. It was almost like my life started.
I think all of us ask us sometimes what we're on this earth to do and why we're here. And I think that as a photojournalist, we're lucky because we have the opportunity to do these incredibly meaningful things that we can leave behind for others to look at, enjoy, share.
These things that we go through in doing this work, there's so much, if you are open to it, to realize and to understand about yourself, about the world, about the people whose lives you document.
The camera doesn't really matter. It really doesn't. I mean, what really matters is what you're doing with the camera and the person's eye behind the camera.
So many times, someone will look at your work and tell you something new. You'll learn something about what you've done by how they see it.
The underlying force of whatever I achieved was driven by deep passion and obsession.
When you get the photograph that you like, it will make my day. It just charges me like, wow, that was all worth it. It was worth getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I think we all feel that way, don't we? I think ask anyone who makes anything. That it changes your state when you've made something that you're proud of, that you're happy with. It lifts you.
And I've totally fallen back in love with photography and thinking of why would anyone want to retire from something that they love doing?
I don't normally become emotional in a session. I manage to keep a lid on it because it's not my grief, it's not my loss, not my pain. Having said that, if a tear escapes, it shows that we're human.
You need to shoot from the heart to make work that connects with your, audience. If you're not feeling it, if it's not what drives you, then I don't think it will work.
You've got a front row seat to the world's history unfolding right in front of your eyes, and there you are taking pictures.
When you press the shutter, you are the sum total of all your experience and knowledge in that moment.
In my business, it's better to be lucky than good. If you're lucky and you put yourself in these positions time after time, you will find yourself in places which are very important.
For our patrons, well, there is a more show tomorrow and New Year's Day. Just some of my personal thoughts as we develop the film from the last year and reload for a new year to come. The Photowalk show returns January the 7th, so until we lace those boots together again, take care.